Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be making a dagger. So the steel that I'm starting with is that 416 and W1 stainless sanmai that I made in a previous video. So I'm just going to get right to work forging in this point. I'm making sure to work it evenly so that my core doesn't get off center or I don't have unwanted distortion in ways that could give me problems down the road later. I'm also being pretty careful because I don't want to work it too aggressively, because this material is a little bit prone to splitting if you're not very friendly with it. Now I want to induce a little bit of distortion on purpose to give myself a little bit of a more interesting pattern. So I'm going to go to the chop saw, and I'm going to use the chop saw to cut in a little bit of a ladder pattern going down the blade. That way once I forge it flat, the material will kind of even out, but because I've cut away some of the material, there's going to be distortion, and in the end that pattern's going to not just be a straight line, but it's actually going to be wavy and a little bit more jagged and a little bit cooler to look at. Now I'm forging the bevels in a little bit by hand. That's also just kind of getting through the grooves I cut in, and it's just fun and gets me a little bit more set up for grinding and gets me a little bit closer to my final shape. I did some of the beveling by hand, and then I went to the power hammer and did a little bit more. And then I got Jack to help me out and strike so I could use a flatter. Just kind of dial things in a little bit and get things smoother and crisper. This is a really nice way to forge in some bevels, and I haven't really done this before, but it worked pretty well. Now that the bevels are mostly forged in, it's time to go ahead and cut this blade off the bar. That way I can flip it around, start cleaning up the ricasso and what's going to be the tang. Having a nice big air hammer definitely makes this all easier and faster, but you can totally do it by hand, and for, years, that's what I've been doing. I've got plenty of videos of forging things completely by hand on my channel, but I've got the hammer now, so I'm using it. It's a lot of fun. And, it just allows me to do more things. Now that the blade is forged, it's time to go into the oven for my 3 thermal cycles. I'm doing 3 cycles at decreasing heats. The temperatures will just depend on the steels you're using. I'm heat treating as W1 because that's the core steel. That's the one that's actually going to get hard, and that's the one that's going to need to hold an edge. Once I do that, I made myself a template so I could scribe lines and give myself lines to work to for my profile. If my finger wasn't in the way, you'd be able to see that I was using the edge of the belt to slowly just carve right along that line. This is a really accurate way to do things. You can just kind of carve slowly to the line and use that edge of the belt. It's very aggressive, but also very controlled at the same time. That's one of the best ways to grind curves, in my opinion. Another way to do it would be to go to a contact wheel and maybe flip the grinder horizontally, but I can do things just as accurately on the edge of the belt. Once I've got the profile ground in, I'm going to do a little bit of bevel grinding. That way my edge thickness is at a good place for heat treat. I don't want to take it too thin, or I'm going to be struggling with decarb and maybe even warping. But if I don't grind it at all, I run the risk of maybe not having the steel harden all the way through. You have to keep in mind that the W1, that's my core steel, is a fairly shallow hardening steel, and quenching in oil, it tends to not harden all the way through. So if I left this full thickness, I might have an accidental hamon on the edge where I don't want it. After I hardened the blade, I threw it in the other oven for tempering. I did 2 2-hour cycles at 380 degrees. Once it was done with that, I brought it back to the grinder to do my finish grinding. After grinding to a 220 grit on the flat platen, I took it to the contact wheel with a 400 grit, and that did a great job of getting me ready for hand sanding. After getting a nice hand-sanded satin finish, it's time to etch the blade. So I'm just going to clean it up and to give it a dunk in some ferric chloride. That's going to etch the core steel more than the stainless. It's also going to kind of reveal the mixing zone between the layers where we get kind of a cool effect going on. And then it's onto the grinder to clean up the tang and the shoulders so I can start working on the handle. I've got this nice chunk of hickory for the handle. It was from some sort of tool handle. So I'm just using the height gauge to mark out and find the center on both ends. That way I can go to the drill press and drill it out with a nice big hole. Once I've got that hole, I can use some broaches to get the tang to fit nice and snug. This handle is going to have a copper ferrule at both ends. So I went to the hardware store and just got a couple end caps. And I crushed them just a little bit so they're not round, and then drilled out some holes and filed them to where they are almost fitting up to where they need to on the blade. Next, I marked out where the ferrules need to fit on the handle, made a bandsaw cut around, and then used my sloyd to split off the extra material. It's a very traditional way of doing this, and it worked very well. I shaped the handle on the grinder. There wasn't really much work to do there. It was already pretty close to where I wanted it. And then I went ahead and heat colored the copper. That made it a little bit more interesting, a little more rustic, a little bit more chaos going on. I also burnt the handle. With woods like hickory and oak, it's really nice to burn them and then brush them with a wire brush. That makes it just feel good, look good, and it's just a nice finish to do on woods like this with the coarser grain. Once I've got the handle burnt, I glued on the ferrules and then drove the handle and the ferrules onto the blade. Once the epoxy is cured, I go ahead and cut off the excess tang and then peen over what's left. I really like how this dagger turned out. I don't think it's for everybody though. It's definitely a really weird piece, and I think a lot of people aren't going to get it. I personally enjoy it just because it's weird and it's got a lot of textures. I'm a textures guy. All the textures on this piece just kind of make me happy. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. It would be much appreciated if you'd subscribe and go follow me over on Instagram. If you'd like to see me make a sheath for this dagger, drop a comment, let me know. But thank you for watching. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. And I'll see you in the next video.